is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am your host, Andy Steele. The guest tonight is Chris Sarns, Mr. World Trade Center 7 himself, the man who is behind a number of articles that have come out talking about the impossible explanation that NIST has given us for why this building just suddenly fell in 7 seconds. 47-story steel frame high-rise building should not be falling because of fire. Certainly should not be falling that symmetrically because of a failure in one column. So he'll be talking about that tonight, talking about some of the content in his articles. And we're going to talk a little bit about the recent AIA resolution, the outcome of it. Didn't turn out very good, unfortunately. And I have not listened to the quote-unquote debate that took place at the business meeting at the AIA convention yet. I will be doing that this week, so if you want further news on this, more a detailed analysis, more knowledgeable insight on what took place there, tune in next week. I'll be going over that once I listen. But I have gotten some secondhand accounts of what happened at the meeting. From what I've heard of it, there weren't a lot of good technical arguments raised against the evidence for controlled demolition or the resolution. Many of the objections were based off of fear, based off of politics, based off of ungrounded beliefs about what we were seeking. So you'll be able to hear it yourself because I'll be playing some of that audio next week. But wait until next year, as they say in sports, because we're going to keep on coming back, going to keep on bringing this information to as many people as possible until we have justice. Because this war for 9/11 truth, this information war for the heart and soul of America, ends at a time of our choosing, not the other side's. So before I play my interview with Chris Sarns, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families, and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that beginning now. And that is 10 seconds. Chris Sarns is a researcher for AE 9/11 Truth and the author of several articles unraveling some of the most glaring inconsistencies and outright frauds in the NIST report on World Trade Center Building 7. He's the co-author with Simon Faulkner on a recent series of articles titled NIST WTC 7 Reports, filled with fantasy, fiction, and fraud. We'll be talking about some of those articles today, among other things. Chris, welcome back to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you, Andy.
Now, new listeners probably listening to this show may not have heard your first time you were on this program, so tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into this topic, and what you've been doing all these years with AE 9/11 Truth.
Okay, well, like most people, I bought into the official conspiracy theory, and I should have recognized that the towers were controlled demolitions, but I didn't. I was in shock like everybody else. It wasn't until about 2005 that I saw a video of Building 7 imploding, and it was like, the video was like 6 or 7 seconds long, but by the time that building went out of sight, I knew it was a controlled demolition, and immediately thereafter, all that implied. And that's when I had what I call my oh shit moment. The world changed at that point. And I knew things were bad, but I had no idea just how bad. And it took me a while to come to grips with that. I just got angry. I went through, the anger, the grief, the rage, depression, the whole 9 yards. So it took me several months, but finally I decided I can't sit on this. I've got to do something. And that was around the beginning of 2006. So I was new to the internet. I hadn't been on it much, but I went to the internet and just started looking around. And I typed in WTC 7, or World Trade Center 7, and the first site I came up with was WTC7.net, Jim Hoffman's site. And that was, from there, I spread out everywhere. I got involved with the Loose Change Forum, which was a beehive of activity at the time, and it was kind of the central debating house and information exchange for the 9/11 Truth Movement. Just an amazing place. It eventually went down. But then Dylan Avery actually recommended that I go over to the JREF forum and start, debating with those guys. So I did, and that proved to be very fruitful, even though they're devoutly, defending the official conspiracy theory and absolutely attack everyone who disagrees. They are very useful in spite of themselves in that they have access to all information and photographs and documents, which makes me believe that they're connected through the back door to the powers that be. But in any case, by arguing with them, I learned a great deal. And one of the first things I got into was I noticed that on page 18 of the 2004 NIST report, the progress report on Building 7, they talked about this big gaping hole in the front of Building 7. But on the same page, they had a couple of entries that were in direct conflict with that, like firemen leaving saw dust and wires hanging down in the lobby. Well, if there had been that huge gash in the front of the building from floor 10 to the ground, the lobby would have been full of debris, whatever hit it, in the entire front of the building. So I got into a long discussion over there, and a thread that ran 2 years and over 5,000 posts about the 10-story hole. And as it turns out, in the end, I was right. In the final report, that 10-story gouge is not there. All the debris damage from the collapse of Tower 1 is west of center and above floor 5. So that was kind of my introduction to this whole thing. And then I also got into a debate with them about the diesel fuel fires, which just using the information in the NIST report, the 2004 NIST report, and the 2002 FEMA report, I discovered that all the diesel tanks, fuel lines, pumps, and everything else were in the west end of the building, with the exception of this one generator room in the northeast corner of floor 5. So that had to be where the supposed diesel fuel fires that caused the collapse were. But then on page, I believe it's 23 or 28 of the FEMA report of 2002, there's a picture of the louvers in that 5th floor generator room, and there's no smoke. So just using common sense, I figured that, hey, if the louvers were open, smoke would be pouring out. And if the louvers were closed, the fire would be starved for air and could not burn hot enough to cause any damage. So I went round and round with the JREFers on that one for about 2 years too. And eventually I posted it over at Loose Change, my final summary. And a month later, NIST gave up the diesel fuel fire idea and said it was normal office fires. So that was like, I posted in November of 2007, and they gave up the ghost in December of 2007. So there's two things that I was able to prove. Basically, I took away their original theory of diesel fuel fires and debris damage. And then in 2008, I joined Architects and Engineers. Well, actually, I signed up and signed the petition in 2007, but I went to see the taping of Blueprint for Truth over in the Bay Area, and met Richard Gage, and we all went out for drinks afterward. And I told him that I had been debating at JREF, and he said he was going to have a debate with Mark Roberts, the JREF master of ceremonies, as it were. So I told him, look, I know these guys and I know their tactics. Let me help prep you for that. And he said, sure. So I joined AE 9/11 Truth the next day and started prepping Richard for that debate. And I've been, working as prepping him for debates, being the World Trade Center 7 expert, as it were. So that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years now, from 2008 until now. It's been just about 8 years exactly that I joined AE 9/11 Truth.
And you've been a critical asset to this movement. I mean, I basically, you're kind of like coach. You're like the trainer here. You're like the guy in the corner, basically giving advice between rounds. And you helped prep Richard for the C-SPAN interview, I remember. So, I mean, you are an important part of this organization, and I'm very happy that you are still with us here as we move forward and do so many new things. Now, I want to dive into this new series of articles because you touched on some of the things. We're going to go into it a little bit deeper. So we're just going to jump right into this first question. You and Simon Faulkner wrote in part 1 of your series, again, that's called NIST World Trade Center 7 Reports Filled with Fantasy, Fiction, and Fraud. But you wrote, the United States government's official investigator of the destruction of the 3 skyscrapers on 9/11 is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, an arm of the Department of Commerce. The agency became highly politicized during a Clinton-era restructuring. In essence, recalls a NIST whistleblower, we lost our scientific independence and became little more than hired guns. Now, I've never heard about that before until I read your article. Can you explain that? What happened, according to this whistleblower?
Actually, Simon is the one who found that. It was an education for me. We both learned a lot from each other doing this. My main job was to make sure everything was technically correct and he had the details correct. And his job was to put it all in English, because I tend to be a little cryptic and not fully explain what I mean. So we had, Simon found that. I don't know where he found it, but it's a very, critical quote that even before 9/11, the agency had already been co-opted, as are all government agencies now. The whole thing is just rotten to the core, just completely lost as far as I'm concerned.
It's crazy how much politics plays into these critical decisions that most people think investigations like the one we saw with 9/11 should rise above that. That, when it comes down to getting to the bottom of events like what we saw on that day and something that cost so many lives, that, the main goal should be finding out what happened. And, as we found out, as you've learned, and of course, AE 9/11 Truth, that's not been the case. Now, you also said in your article that in the 2004 report, NIST fabricated a myth that debris from World Trade Center Building 1, which is the North Tower, created that 10-story hole at a specific location at the base of World Trade Center 7 South Face. You talked about it in the beginning of this interview. And then in the following year, it propagated that myth in Popular Mechanics, and it defended NIST's work, as you said. Now, I think this is important because I think the majority of Americans think that this explanation is the explanation, that the fall of Tower 1 caused destruction of World Trade Center 7, and that is what caused it to come down. But NIST says that's not the case. They say it right in point number 21 of its FAQ on World Trade Center 7. Can you elaborate on that for the audience?
I don't know what the point 21 is, but basically the philosophy is, and they're still using it today in Ukraine, is they make an outrageous charge that is absolutely false, but they lay on it so heavy, and they have the news media lay on it so heavy, that they embed that thought in everyone's mind. So even when they come back later and make a correction, most people don't hear the correction, and so the damage is done. The thought has been implanted in people's minds, and like, we'll get to it later, but at the AIA convention, somebody talked about the diesel fuel fires causing the building to collapse. People still believe that. And this is the philosophy they use. So, you know, we're just stuck with that, and they're very, very effective with that.
Well, what gets me is that Popular Mechanics cites this, according to what you wrote here, that they use this explanation. Have they ever made any attempt to correct this? I mean, I know they came out with a second edition in 2011 that still said that there's no architects or engineers of any, or anybody of any related experience questioning the destruction of these buildings on 9/11. We actually confronted them about this, one of their writers on C-SPAN, a year or so ago. So I know they didn't correct that, but have they made any corrections with regard to what their official explanation is at Popular Mechanics based off of what NIST ended up changing its official explanation to being? Or actually debunking the further, when it put out its report, I should explain better, they debunked those earlier explanations that people thought were the official story.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they did not correct themselves. And the only correction, I believe, is in the final NIST report or in the FAQs, which most people don't see. So that's why so many people still think that there were diesel fuel fires that caused the collapse, or that huge the debris damage from the towers, and, you know, a building fell on it. Okay, a lot of people still believe that. So their propaganda is like very effective, and this is one of the things we're up against.
Yeah, and the point note number 21, and I have that in front of me from the FAQ, and I think this is critical. I bring this up a lot on the show. I want to give people that quick reference in their minds to point others to when this comes up. It says, did debris from the collapse of World Trade Center 1 cause damage to World Trade Center 7 structure in a way that contributed to the building's collapse? And it says that there was debris from Tower 1 that caused some structural damage to the southwest region of World Trade Center 7, but this structural damage did not initiate the collapse. So right from NIST's own mouth. And what you're saying is absolutely true. The media, all they have to do is say something. All they got to do is put that out there in people's minds, make that imprint, and then just kind of cough out a retraction on the back page later on, counting on the fact that most people probably won't catch that retraction and just go on merrily thinking that the original explanations are what is gospel. I mean, I remember in the beginning of this, before I was even really savvy about any of this evidence, I was just waking up, I was watching Building 7 come down and knowing that fire did not cause that. I don't have the full story at that time, or all of the evidence points in my head to be able to argue it very well. But I just knew, my gut instinct and just common sense, that this is not the case, what the government is telling me. And I would have people tell me things about those diesel tanks exploding. And they would say this so certainly, so sure of themselves, so confidently. And guess what? Looking back, they're wrong. They're dead wrong. So where is that arrogance coming from? Where is that confidence coming from? It's a foundation of nothing.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is what we're up against. And I don't know what to say. It's just... when we get into the AIA convention later on, we'll have some more to say about that.
But now, I want to ask you about Popular Mechanics a little bit more about their supposed thorough research. David Coburn. I don't know if everyone in this audience has heard that infamous interview with, I believe the name is Charles Goyette, where there was a number of things that David Coburn was throwing out, not just about the controlled demolitions of the towers, but other aspects of the 9/11 crime that he really couldn't back up. I mean, some things that just sounded ridiculous on its face, and he ended up sounding foolish, because that's what happens when you have to defend a lie. It's that you have to make up more lies in order to support it, and it just falls apart for him. He doesn't sound good at all. And you don't hear the mainstream, or I should say corporate media, playing interviews like that or referring to those kinds of exchanges. They would rather selectively edit interviews with our people and lie and manipulate. This has been the case. But I want to get your opinion on David Coburn and that interview, and again, Popular Mechanics' thorough research.
Oh, well, they didn't do any research at all. The only research they did was finding things to support their theory, and they made stuff up. But the biggest issue in that interview with Charles Goyette, or whatever his name was, was Colburn actually said he saw a picture of the 10-story gouge, which is a blatant lie. No other way to put it. He lied through his teeth. There is no picture of the 10-story gouge because there was no 10-story gouge. And I can't say what I really feel about that on the air, but basically he lied. And that is, to me, a criminal offense in this particular case.
Well, I mean, it certainly is slimy. I mean, I have no problem coming out and saying that myself. You've actually got the quote here in part 2 of your series in the form of a transcript. It says, this is what Colburn said, when the North Tower collapsed, there was damage to Building 7. What we found out was about 25% of the building's south face had been carved away from it. We have seen pictures that are property of the NY Police Department and various other governmental agencies that were not given permission to disseminate. And then Charles Goyette interjects, popular mechanics got to see them, but the average American citizen can't see them? And Davin said, correct. But now this ended up being debunked, as you just said. So what is he seeing? Did he dream this?
Yeah. I believe he made it up to cover himself. He didn't think he would ever get caught. And of course, he didn't. You know, he got away with it. You know, no one has been even busted for it yet. It's like the banking thing, you know.
Well, you know, and that's kind of the way things go here now. It's a sad reality and something I guess we've all had to come to grips with as we reach societal maturity. Some of us do, at least in the society, recognizing what we're up against, recognizing the kind of system that we're dealing with that can keep a lie like the 9/11, the official story, cemented in everybody's minds. But I don't think that the real perpetrators, whoever they were, and the media counted on the kind of scrutiny that they've received over the years. Now, again, this is speculation, so I'm qualifying it as that. But I think they thought the majority of people would just use the internet to share videos of their dogs or a cute squirrel in their backyard or whatever. It wouldn't be producing this user-created content, that they wouldn't have a Chris Sarns out there watching Building 7 fall one day back in 2005 and dedicating the next 7 years and more to exposing what really happened.
And there's a lot of us who are doing that. Yeah, for me, it was once I realized that the whole thing is a lie, it changed my life. And it's not something you can just put aside and forget about and walk away from. I will be doing this the rest of my life, and whether we manage to expose it or not, I really have no choice. Quitting is not an option, you know?
Yeah, and what's funny, because some people are able to look at this and walk away from it. I don't understand what the difference between those people are and us. It may be some kind of psychological defense mechanism. I mean, for certain, Fran Sure has put out a number of articles talking about that aspect of it. But I'm with you. I can't live with a lie like this. Once you see this, it's something you can't unsee. It's part of you, and so we got to keep pushing for justice. I want to ask you about this too. This is a very important point, and this is a point of technical analysis that I think our listeners should be familiar with. But can you talk about the claim that the shear studs failed due to differential expansion? Explain what all that is. What do you mean by all of that, and why is that a big deal?
Well, that's just one part of their thermal expansion theory that is just blatantly false. And when I was first reading the report, after it first came out, I noticed that when they did the shear stud thing, they heated the beams but not the slab. Well, of course you're going to have a differential if you heat one element and not the other. And I looked at that and I just could not believe what I was reading, that they would actually do a test and on something so blatantly fraudulent. And I looked at that and went, oh my God, they actually did. They heated the beams but not the slab, and that's how they got their temperature differential, and that's how they got their expansion differential. Had they heated both, the studs would not have failed. And I also noticed that they applied 4 hours worth of heat in 1.5 seconds, which is, of course, totally unrealistic, impossible, and gives a skewed result, because when you apply that heat, it dissipates over those 4 hours, so you don't get the same result. And also, when you apply it slowly, the beam sags, and the sagging takes up a lot of the thermal expansion. So we have a list of about 10 different things that are wrong with the thermal expansion theory, and that was just one of them. The first one I found was in the original 2004 report. They said that there were shear studs on the girder. And just for people who don't know, a shear stud is kind of like a bolt that is welded to the beam and sticks up in the slab, and then when they pour the slab around these shear studs, it makes the two composite. It holds them together. It keeps the beam from moving sideways or up and down without the slab going with it. It's all a composite unit. So in the final report, they took that same paragraph and just removed a few words and said basically that there were not shear studs on the girders. That is blatantly false. And we have gone round and round about that. The last word on that is the drawings that they released in 2012 shows shear studs on that girder on other floors, on floor 10 and floor 20. And Robert McCoy and I have talked about this. He's on the board, and he's also one of the main architects with Architects and Engineers. That doesn't make any sense that they would put shear studs on that girder on some floors, but not others, and I agree. And also, the drawings that they released, and the one that they used to say that there wasn't any shear studs, were interim drawings. And that particular drawing, they had taken out the shear stud notation to put in another detail about the angle that the girder came into column 79. And they left that part out, and also left out the shear stud notation. So it's pretty obvious that there were shear studs on that girder, and that alone would have stopped their theory. But like I say, we had 10 different things, any one of which would negate their thermal expansion pushing the girder off the seat theory. And it took us months of rewriting to unravel all the obfuscation. But we finally did. I think we've got a pretty good handle on it, and we've got all our facts straight. It's quite an interesting article. I learned a lot in the writing of it, and so did Simon. But I say the thermal expansion is just bizarre beyond belief.
Well, now, talk about the false premise in which NIST set this impossibly high floor beam temperature in order to try to explain its thermal expansion hypothesis.
Oh, okay. Well, that was another JREF discovery that Tony Zambati and I were over there debating with the JREFers about the thermal expansion, and it occurred to me that by the time you have enough heat to push the girder 5.5 inches, it would have sagged and prevented it from pushing it that far. And it was just a theory. So Tony one night decided to do the math. And he came back and said, yeah, Chris, your intuition was correct. And he had a spreadsheet that we have since updated and refined a little bit. But it's in the last, the article that we just released, that shows that at 400 degrees, the beam starts to sag. And by 600 degrees, which is what we thought that they heated it to, it has only sagged, or it has only expanded just over 5.5 inches, but at the same time, it's lost about 1/8 of an inch to sagging. It's sagged about, 6 or 7 inches, which shortens it about 1/8 of an inch in length. So even at 600 degrees Celsius, the girder was not pushed the 5.5 inches. It was pushed 5.4 inches, which also is false because it turns out they needed 6.25 because they lied about the seat being 11 inches wide when it was really 12. But they ignored altogether the fact that sagging would reduce the amount of thermal expansion. And the maximum that it can expand, it's all there on the chart, is about 5 3/4 inches. And at that point, at about 658 degrees, the beam is sagging so much that you're losing more to sagging than you are gaining in length in thermal expansion. So it just, according to the laws of physics and the tables that they have, that beam cannot expand more than 5 3/4 inches. And yet, since the seat was 12 inches wide, the beam had to expand at least 6 inches, or 6 1/4 inches, as they called it. But it can't. It's just physically impossible for the beams to expand 6 inches.
So these sagging beams would have prevented this thermal, it would have taxed the ability of this thing to thermally expand to the extent that they said it did, basically. I mean, I understand what you're saying there. I can visualize it. I've seen the pictures in your article that show the sagging beams, and this is common sense once it's pointed out to you. I don't think the average person, of course, the average person is probably not thinking about this kind of things this in depth as you very smart guys arguing over with the J-Reffers. But yeah, I mean that's very clear to me, and very clear when it's actually mapped out for you with those pictures that you show in these articles. That's why I recommend everybody go look at the articles. I'm a visual learner, so that helps me. But what's the big deal? This is another part of your articles about NIST getting an inch or so wrong on the seat plate width. I mean, an inch. I think most people think of an inch as not being that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. So can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, they just flat out lied. There's absolutely no excuse. When they finally did release the drawings, David Cole went through them and found the drawings and found the seat, and it very clearly says 1 foot 0 inches wide. No one could possibly get that wrong. There's no excuse. They flat out lied. And so they had to cover for that. And when Dave wrote them and said, hey, what's the deal here? It clearly says it's 1 foot wide, yet you said 5.5 inches was enough to push the girder off the seat. So they came back with this cockamamie, we transposed the numbers. And they put out an errata, I guess they call it, whatever it is, etera, that, we transposed the numbers. Actually, the axial walk-off was 5.5, and the lateral walk-off was 6.25. Well, Ron Brookman showed that no, in actual fact, the axial, in other words, lengthwise walk-off was 6 1/4 by using the same drawings. So it was like kind of a fig leaf, another lie to cover a lie. And even so, they didn't explain, okay, fine, even if we accept your 6 1/4, your thermal expansion cannot exceed 5 3/4 at 658 degrees. Beside the fact that you said it only was heated to 400 degrees, which is only 3.4 inches or 3.2 inches, something like that. But they managed to obfuscate that too. They by using the figure 600 over and over again, a lot of people, myself included, came to think that, they must have been talking about, they must have heated it, or it must have been heated to 600 degrees because that comes out to 5.5 inches, which is what they needed. That's when I learned, another one I learned from Kevin Ryan is he was always using the 400 degree number, and I went back and, again, using the find function, going through all 4 volumes of the final report and looking at every instance where 400 or 600 is used, and came to realize that, yes, they did say that the beams were only heated to 400 degrees Celsius, which means they could only have expanded 3.2 inches, not the 5.5. But they, in a lot of places, they talk about 600 degrees, And if you do the math, 600 degrees works out to 5.517 or 5.517 inches, just slightly over 5.5 inches, which leads people like myself and other investigators to think it was 600 degrees when it wasn't. It was only 4. So there's another reason their theory doesn't work.
Right, and these inches are a big deal when you're doing these calculations. I mean, I think people lose sight of this, but what you're saying is a huge deal. I mean, if NIST was on trial for putting out a bad report, I mean, this would be a case closer right here. I mean, this would actually justify rerunning the analysis with the correct information, which actually when I had a person on who believes the official story, he agreed they should rerun the analysis with the correct data just to get it right. I think anybody, any reasonable person would agree with that. So the question is, why aren't they doing that? And it amazes me that they've only done what you just described here, putting out that slight correction, but continuing to obfuscate and cover up as they do it. But this should be front page news all over the country. I mean, again, there's a lot of technical jargon on here. Some people may have to listen to this a couple of times or look at the pictures to fully grasp this. But this is incorrect information. And their whole hypothesis, their whole explanation for this impossible event relies on this thermal expansion theory that they put forth. And Chris Sarns and Simon Faulkner and so many other people have outlined numerous instances, numerous points that completely debunk that. All right, so this is huge. This is why the public needs to get savvy on Building 7. This is why the public needs to get savvy on the official explanation and know why it's impossible. Know these points. Learn about column number 79 and thermal expansion, at least to the extent that you can understand how NIST is lying to you. You also said that the floor beams could not have pushed that girder as far as NIST claims. How do you come up with those measurements?
Well, Tony Zambati actually did the math. There are standard thermal expansion. They do tests and they post the results. They actually do physical tests where they heat up beams and see how much they expand at given temperatures. Then they make up tables to say, okay, a steel beam will expand this much at this temperature. And there's a table that's set up for that, and there's a formula to determine that. And Tony took that formula and did a spreadsheet showing that at what temperature, they took the beam in question, which is a little over 53 feet long, 53.4 inches and change, and how much it would expand at different temperatures. And they run those, there are computer programs that do all the work for you. You just put in the numbers and the parameters and then push go, and the program spits out all the different numbers, how much the expansion is, what the deflection is and how that relates to the shortening, and you get a spreadsheet with all the numbers in it. And if people read the article, you can look at that spreadsheet, and you can see at 400 degrees Celsius, that 53-foot beam sags, I don't know, a few inches, I forget what it is, but the net result is it shortens it 1/8 of an inch. And at 600 degrees, it sags about 8 or 10 inches or something like that, and shortens it a bit more. I forget exactly how much. And at 658 degrees, it's sagging so much that it's now shortening the beam in spite of the expansion to thermal expansion. It takes a little reading to understand, but basically the sagging, and it was, I believe it was Simon's idea to put the picture in from sagging beams in Philadelphia, I believe it was, to give people a picture. It's really good to have those pictures in there. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's little things like that where Simon takes my technical know-how and puts it into language that the average person can understand. You don't have to have any technical expertise. You can look at it. Okay, I can see those beams are sagging, and I can see how that would shorten the length. And that's basically the whole principle.
Now, you also mentioned about the fact, and I talk about this all the time, that NIST won't release input data on their computer models, saying that it's going to jeopardize public safety. You know, it's going to be the end of the world if they release it for a building that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, what other information could be determined if you had this, if NIST manned up and released this input data?
Well, it would be obvious that they jimmied the data. Take the fires, for instance. They admit that they don't know the fuel load. They couldn't possibly know the fuel load in all the various offices on the east end of floor 12. But you can look at the floor plan and you can see that all the offices are roughly the same size. And they admit and they acknowledge that the walls had steel studs. And by the way, I've built offices like these with a drop ceiling, and the area above the offices is all open. There's no walls above the drop ceiling. And that's to allow air ducts and electrical conduits to be run without getting in, having to go through walls. The result is when you have a fire, once it burns through those tiles, they're just, the older ones are made of pressed fiberboard, the newer ones are made of fiberglass, with a plastic coating. But anyway, once you burn through those, the fire is burning up into that area above the offices and heating that area, and it burns over the top and eventually lights the office next door. So it doesn't burn through the walls, it burns over the top. And this is how the fire moved from office to office. And NIST explains this in their report, and it's obviously true because the fire did spread. And it didn't spread through the walls, it spread over them because the walls were fireproof. So you have a fire spreading over the tops of the walls to the offices around, to the adjoining offices, and they all have the same amount of fuel per square foot. That's what was put into the computer. So if they all have the same amount of fuel per square foot, then that fire is going to spread evenly. But it doesn't. When it gets over to column 79, for some unexplained reason other than they put a wall there, the fire does not burn the office on one side of column 79. It burns around to the east, burns all the way around to the north wall, and then an hour and a half later comes back and burns that office on the west side of column 79. Well, that is clearly fraudulent. The only way that can happen is if they put a wall there to stop the fire from going over that wall, over the wall to the office next to column 79. There's an obvious fraud there. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. Maybe you do need a little knowledge of construction to understand that one, but I happen to have that knowledge because I've built those kind of offices. So there's an obvious fraud. If they were to release the data, it would show that they put a wall there to get the fire to go around column 79 and come back to that office an hour and a half later so they could have it burning at 5 o'clock, which it wasn't.
It reminds me of a movie I saw where a boy meets a girl, and the girl had been in a science fair, and she had won it, and he asked her about it, and she said, yeah, but they took my prize away. And he asked her why, and she says, well, because when I didn't get the results I wanted, I just made them up. Says it very casually, and that's supposed to be the humor of the situation. I mean, I don't know, maybe they were pre-programming us to accept that and think that's funny. It's not funny when it comes to Building 7. I mean, just, the way you...
That is funny. That is exactly what they did. They just jimmied the data to get the results they wanted.
It's just like, yeah, let's just put a wall there. Why not? And lie about it. All right, I want to make sure we talk about the AIA resolution. Now, I want to tell the audience, we're recording this interview on Sunday. The vote was on Saturday. Neither of us were there. Unfortunately, 9/11 Freefall doesn't have the resources of a mega corporation, and so I don't have a team round the clock to do analysis and get all of the quotes and have video and have watched it. So right now, we're basing our analysis off of a witness, somebody that was there and wrote it to us in an email, but we haven't seen the tapes of it yet. So we're going based off of a general understanding of what happened. I'm going to have a deeper analysis of that after I see some of the tapes of the exchange at the business meeting where the vote took place. But the general sense I've gotten from people who were there is that the voting down of the resolution was based more on emotion, on ungrounded fears, not really on any technical standing or any assurance in the official story beyond believing some of the earlier debunked theories that we talked about in this show before. So, again, having just read the email that was sent to us by someone that was there, what do you think about the situation in general and just, the results of that?
Well, first of all, I went to the first Architects AIA convention in San Francisco, the first one we went to. And I suggested that we have laptops with a video of a loop video of Building 7 on one and a loop video of the trade towers on the other. And Richard took that idea and expanded it to 30-inch screens, which turned out to be a very, very effective way of showing people, and it really grabbed people's attention. We got in trouble several times for blocking traffic because we had so many people in front of our booth. But my hat is really off to the AIA for allowing us to have a booth. They are the only national organization of any kind that gives us any credibility whatsoever. So I'm very thankful to the AIA itself for allowing us to have these booths, and I'm not too happy with the people who got up and basically made false statements to the people who were about to vote. That was very discouraging, and the vote itself was very discouraging. But like I say, I have great praise and nothing but good things to say about the AIA itself.
Right, and again, we haven't seen the tapes yet, so before I go into any deeper analysis, I'll have to watch it. But just according to what was said, now, again, these are different people coming up and voicing their opinions, and it's not like Richard standing there being able to answer all of these claims as it's happening. According to my understanding, is that you just have to wait your turn. So if you're the only guy advocating for the resolution and there's 24 people there that have ungrounded fears about voting for it, you've got to wait for 24 people before you get a chance to go up again. So it's difficult if you have the minority opinion. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have, more knowledge about the situation and about the actual details of the building destruction. If you've got less people there than other people basing their opposing views on silly things, I mean, based on what I've heard about it, that's just the way it is. Your view is not going to be heard as much. But there was one guy who argued that it would get them in trouble with the government for even questioning NIST. Now, again, this is not AIA saying it, but these are people within AIA, the people who were voting and voicing opinions there. They were worried about this getting them in trouble with the government. Now, first of all, what's to say about America that someone could even say a statement like that? I mean, this is America. Aren't we supposed to not be worried about getting in trouble with the government for expressing views or questioning something? Now, I'm not ignorant. I know the situation. I'm a grown-up here in the 21st century America. But, I mean, doesn't that just illustrate it right there? That view, no matter how hysterical or ill-founded that idea is, and fear-mongering that is, there you go. That's what's in a lot of people's heads. What's your comments on that, Chris?
Well, it's unfortunately typical behavior. There's a little quick story. I was at a dinner party at my son's house and was talking to one of his friends, and we got in. Of course, I always bring up Building 7, or we got around to it. And I explained to him that 100 feet of free fall can only occur if you remove all the supporting structure on 8 floors, virtually simultaneously, very least in a very, precisely timed manner, and within 2 seconds. You have to remove all the structure on 8 floors. That can only be a controlled demolition. And he says, yeah, but can you explain to me how they managed to rig it? It's just like, hello, It just goes in one ear and out the other. It's amazing how people can just take that information in, have it not register, and then change the subject and ask another question, which is the typical way of avoiding the truth. Is they just kind of, yeah, but what about this and the other thing? never mind the other thing. We already have proven controlled demolition, and you know, he's a nice guy, and he's a friend of my son's, and so I really can't push it any further. But it's a typical reaction, and this is the same kind of reaction we got from the people at the AIA convention, that they cannot accept reality because it blows their entire worldview, and that's what Fran has been talking about for so long. And unfortunately, it covers the majority of Americans. So we're like somebody who said not too long ago, we're pushing a very large rock up a very steep hill.
Well, I use the analogy of like if a neighbor's wife died and you heard that she accidentally killed herself with moving her husband's gun, and her husband's the chief of police. You say, oh, that's sad, and then a few years later you get some details on that grisly death, and you find out that she accidentally shot herself 3 times in the back of the head with a shotgun. You know, you would say, that's impossible. She was obviously murdered. And then someone says, well, how would somebody have gotten into the house? Well, I don't know. We need to find out. I mean, but we've disproven the official story. So now real police work would mean that we find out how this happened. I don't know. All I can do is disprove what the official report said. And this is what we're trying to do right now. I mean, we've done it. We have disproved it. There was another person, apparently, according to the email we received, who called the resolution a wolf in sheep's clothing, that they had been to our page and we talk about controlled demolitions and the towers, so that the resolution itself, that's just saying that we need a new investigation, not asking AIA to say it's a controlled demolition or anything, that is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, I think that's kind of funny that that this resolution is considered the wolf when the official story is what's responsible for, you know, 1 million dead Iraqi soldiers, U.S. soldiers being killed. Of course, the people who died on that day. But our resolution is considered the wolf in this scenario. And maybe I'm being a little emotional and reading into it too much, but I find that somewhat offensive, that statement, or maybe just a poor choice of words. What do you think of that statement?
Actually, I thought from their point of view, it's a pretty good argument. We are the wolf in sheep's clothing, because it is true that there's a lot more than just investigating Building 7. When you come to the conclusion that Building 7 was a controlled demolition, you also come to the other conclusion that it was an inside job, because it takes weeks, and whoever rigged Building 7 knew the towers were coming down, and that's when you have your oh shit moment.
Well, there's a lot of implications with it, and I guess I think the public should be where we are at this point. I mean, after having seen the results of the post-9/11 world, and this gets beyond the technical stuff, obviously, but after having seen the results of it, seeing other things going on in the society, people should at least be questioning. And, you know, we bring up these points, we bring up how NIST's explanation is false, people can look it up, all our stuff is laid out bare for people to analyze and investigate and double-check. NIST hides data. I think that a new investigation is the most reasonable thing that anybody can ask for. And it's just, I mean, I've compared it to one of those professional wrestling matches where you have 3 bad guys against 1 good guy, and somehow that's supposed to be fair, and he's fighting up against all of these obstacles, but somehow he always manages to do it and win. So I think that's what we're going to do in the end. Thanks in large part to people like you continuing to do this and continuing to put your voice out there. Do you have any final words before we conclude this interview, Chris?
No, other than you're doing quite a bit to help move the thing forward, too. The bit on C-SPAN, I really got my hats off to you on that one. We kept bugging them until they finally had Richard Gage on, and he did an amazingly good job. And I have to also tip my hat to the host, who was very hostile to the 9/11 Truth Movement, but yet when he had Richard on, he was very fair and direct and respectful, and he actually asked the right questions that allowed Richard to present his case. Like I say, he was a gentleman and a scholar, and so my hat's off to him, but also to you for making that happen. Thank you, Andy.
Well, no, I was very happy with the way Peter Slen did that, too. I was a nervous wreck until the whole thing was over. My exciting moment would be when they said, "Thank you for watching C-SPAN, tune in tomorrow," and Richard was done. That's when I could finally relax with that. But no, Chris, thanks for coming on 9/11 Freefall. This program's on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.
The 9/11 Commission, which was tasked with giving us the fullest explanation. No, not one sentence in the 571 pages of the 9/11 Commission report even mentions the destruction of World Trade Center 7. Is this one of the reasons, perhaps, that Senator Max Cleland resigns from the commission, citing it's a national scandal? The investigation is compromised. How about expert corroboration? How about Danny Jawenko, 27-year controlled demolitions expert? It starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's controlled demolition. A team of experts did this. It's professional work, without a doubt. How about Hugo Bachmann, Professor Emeritus, Chairman, Department of Structural Dynamics at Earthquake Engineering, Swiss Federal Institute of Technology? In my opinion, the building, World Trade Center 7, was with great probability professionally demolished. Here's a floor plan of Building 7. Now, to bring a building smoothly, symmetrically into its own footprint without falling over, what we have to do is remove the core columns, because what we want to do is bring the outside of the building in on itself. Now, this involves a high degree of precision that fire is not capable of, being an organic process.